Is DLC good? Started December 31st, 2018. As more and more developers in the gaming industry look for new ways to generate income, new ideas are being made to fulfill this goal. You might know of some of these methods. To name a few: free-to-play, microtransactions, which can also break down into loot boxes. However, this video will focus on one of those ideas, DLC. But what is DLC? If somehow you've not yet encountered DLC, I feel both jealous and in some cases sorry for you. DLC is an acronym for downloadable content, i.e. content not yet added to your product, which can be, of course, downloaded. Usually this is content that either adds new ways to play a game or changes the pre-existing playstyle. Also, before we start, I'd like to point out that I will be mainly focusing on paid DLC, but there may be a short talk on free DLC as well. Now that we have the simple stuff out of the way, let's try some types of DLC. Strategy games. Sid Meier's Civilization is one of the famous turn-based strategy games on the market, with the first game coming out back in 1991, with the most recent game, Sid Meier's Civilization 6, coming out in 2018. Let's look a bit at the history of this franchise. While the first Civilization game did not feature DLC, the second did, but it was titled a little differently: Expansions. Civilizations 3 and 4 would follow this expansion trend, but what were they? Generally, these expansions would do just that, expand on the game. You use the same tools or engine of the base game, and give the players more to do. However, these expansions, while they did cost money, were like very large updates to the game, except actually from their advertisements, they were practically different games, just running the same Civ 4 engine. Steam sells Sid Meier's Civilization 4 Colonization and says that Civ 4 is not needed to play it, so practically it's a different game with the same name. However, some may argue they're close enough to each other, why not just make an update? For older games it makes sense to do it in a way like this because back in the day, internet was slower. Why download something when you can just have a new disc? After all, Civilization 5's Gods and Kings as well as Brave New World were practically expansions in the same sense that Civilization 4's Colonization or Warlords were. Hey, I'm just here with the future note. I don't know what I was thinking while I was writing the end of this section, as the game Civilization 4 was released in 2005, so while the final argument is somewhat relevant to the topic, it was not at all relevant for Civ 4. But I think it's funny enough now to leave it in, and hopefully this will get me in the future to do better research next time to prevent embarrassing myself. Sorry for the tangent, continuing on. But Civilization 5 was the first game in the series to release DLC. I will divide it into two categories: expansions and others. Expansions are the DLC the size of the games that expansions would be in previous games, being Gods and Kings and Brave New World. And others is everything else, your Civ packs and also map packs. Let's quickly talk through the others category. We have a lot of extra civilizations and maps, which for a small fee of around $5.50 Canadian each is not too bad of a deal, but all 13 together you're looking at approximately $70. You don't really need these extra civilizations if you don't want to play them, but they are available to you if you feel up for it, so it can get a slight pass. And then the expansions, and this is where I will admit some of my neutrality may go off the rail, just as a warning, due to having played Civilization 5 for so long. I would normally say it's important to have the DLCs, but this exercise requires that I act as someone without them yet. So let's suppose you just finished playing Civ 4 and Civ 5 just came out. Wow! The next game in the series will certainly be on par, if not more entertaining, right? Well, not from the results I found. It turns out Civ 5 was a broken game at launch, and lacked a lot of what made Civ 4 so good. And I'll admit, talking to my friends in the past, I've heard this. No trade routes, religions, World Congress, etc. Civilization 5 would eventually catch up, with Gods and Kings adding religions and other tidbits, and Brave New World adding tourism, trade routes, and things that made it really feel like the next installment in the franchise, not some crappy rushed out cash grab. And while I ask partial forgiveness for being that harsh on Firaxis now, that's what it was on launch. I'm definitely thinking why they would release it like this, perhaps currency or time restraints. But they could have tried to allow something like pre-purchasing of the game, even if the year 2010 wasn't fully yet aware of the scale of pre-purchasing games nowadays, if it was currency that they lacked. Or perhaps it was purely capitalism. Make people buy your game for money, and then when they see it's bad, show them something to make it better for even more money. For around $165 Canadian, buying the game and all of its DLC collectively is a pretty high price point. Thankfully, places like Steam allow you to get the whole bundle, the game and the DLC, at a drastically lowered price, sometimes at around 67% off. Thankfully, DLC doesn't get much more outrageous in price. Paradox Interactive. If you're into strategy games and haven't heard of Paradox, what are you even doing? They own many a popular franchise, but I will be sticking to the group I am most familiar with. However, of course, I have not spent equal time amongst them all, so in decreasing order of playtime, I will be talking about Hearts of Iron 4, Crusader Kings 2, Stellaris, and Europa Universalis 4. These games, to my knowledge, are some of Paradox's more well-known strategy IPs, minus the Victoria series or the New Imperator Realm. Along with these being the most recent additions of their series, if I am correct, they are also the most costly of their series. If you didn't catch the transition joke just a minute ago, you might be surprised at how stupidly high some of these get. I'm going to list the prices of the games by themselves, and then any DLC they might have. Of course, the DLC may vary in price and quality, but I will only list the collective DLC price. Hearts of Iron 4 by itself costs 44 Canadian, and then the DLC together cost around $110 Canadian, for a total price of $154 Canadian. Stellaris for the base game costs $44, the DLC is $161 Canadian, for a total Stellaris cost of $205. Crusader Kings 2 is $44, the DLC is $337, which totals out to $381. And what about Europa Universalis 4? $44 game, $403 Canadian for the DLC, totaling out at $447 Canadian. Assuming you didn't find a sale for buying the full sets of these games, it'd wind up costing a total of $1,055 for all of those games, plus their DLCs. Why would anyone buy things at such absurd price? You, the consumer, would exclaim. Although, I'll admit, so far in this video I haven't really been fair to the developers. So, let's try and tackle why a developer might charge such a high price in the final topic of this video. Developers. So, what are the developers hiding here? Are they purely wanting to become rich, or are there other reasons behind this? Well, the first thing on the Steam page I see myself looking for is the prices. One might not be so quick to look at when the title was published. As an example, let's take Crusader Kings 2. This game was first published back in 2012. I don't know about you, but I think this really does speak a lot to the genre. Let's take a franchise like Call of Duty quickly for comparison. While it has its own way of making a lot of extra money on top of buying the game, namely loot boxes, which are something to be talked about someday in the future, hopefully a lot further in the future when I figure out how to properly structure episodes and when I know some more people who would help with the research phase. Spiel over. It seems reasonable to assume for a AAA title selling at $60 to $80 at launch, they can probably make that money they were aiming for that year well enough until the next game in the series comes out in just that frame. 1 year. So while you could argue Paradox also releases games every year, I like to think that they have multiple teams for each game, and that each game's income is going to be the main source of that team's income. Let's look back at CK2. Sure, it cost us $44, but let's look at the DLC's price, divided by 7 to roughly simulate the DLC's release time over the 7 years of its continued development. This shows us that the $337 total price point comes down pretty far to $48. For strategy games at least, this shows that they are hopefully striving to make a good game, but making games and working is not free. They need to generate income from somewhere, and for prolonged titles, while it does sometimes feel like they stretch it out too long, it makes it easier to find a sustainable income for the project's lifespan. On top of that, some companies, like Paradox, even if perhaps only to make themselves look less cash-hungry to the public, have made it so that during multiplayer sessions of their games, all players play with what the host has. So if the host has splurged on all the DLC but no one else has, everyone in the lobby will play with the DLC anyways. Well, maybe not indenting Paradox's cash flow too much, I'm guessing it at least alleviates some of the consumers' bank accounts of all the trouble whenever a new expansion releases. Conclusion? There's so much more I want to talk about on this subject, but I am going to try and cut myself off here, because I feel like the video is already going to be a hell of a pain to put together, especially for a pilot episode just from the script. I also kind of, in a sense, drop off in quality the longer I spend writing the script, so I will just end it here. I may try and come back to this topic well into the future if I can find a good deal more information, and you all enjoy this topic as well. I thank you for stopping by and giving me a chance to try and describe things on the topic better to you. If you feel I have made any mistakes, or have suggestions on other things to try and explain, preferably in the game making industry, either about a specific game or a subject related to the industry. So, well, not everything can be explained. Hopefully, I have explained this to you. And that concludes our tour of the Xsylum.